I was pouring coffee in the farmhouse kitchen I had owned for over 40 years when my son said, "Mom, my mother-in-law is taking your bedroom today. We prepared the barn for you." I thought he was joking until my daughter-in-law added, "My mother needs somewhere quiet and stable." By sunset, my belongings were piled beside a narrow bed in the barn while she slept in my room. They thought they had removed me. They had only awakened me. Welcome to Silent Revenge with Phoenix. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment for me. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I read every single one. A quick note. Certain details have been adjusted for storytelling. The heart of this story, the message is what I hope stays with you. The morning it all changed, I was making coffee in the kitchen of the farm I'd lived on for 43 years. The same kitchen where I'd raised my son Vernon alone after Tom died, where every mortgage payment had been a sacrifice, where I'd cried and bled and built a life from dirt and determination. I'm Lorraine Harrington. I'm 63 years old, and that September morning I had no idea I was about to lose everything I'd worked for. Vernon sat at the scarred wooden table scrolling through his phone. My son, 38, wearing one of those expensive suits from his furniture store, the kind of suit that looked too good for a man I'd later learn was 3 months from bankruptcy. His wife, Margot, moved around the kitchen with nervous efficiency, packing boxes with the practiced movements of someone who'd done this before. She was 35, managed a hair salon downtown, and had lived in my house for 6 months after her company downsized and they lost their apartment. It was supposed to be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. "Mom, we need to talk," Vernon said without looking up from his screen. I set down my coffee mug, the one that said, "World's Best Mom," the one he'd given me 10 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What's on your mind, honey?" Margot cleared her throat. "It's about my mother. She's been diagnosed with high blood pressure, and the doctor says she needs a really stable, quiet environment, somewhere familiar." I nodded sympathetically. "That's terrible news. Have you looked into assisted living? I know the costs can be overwhelming, but there are some excellent places." "That's just it," Vernon interrupted. "We can't afford those places. Not with Margot having to manage Mom's medical appointments and everything. The financial situation is complicated." I waited. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. "Estelle is moving into the master bedroom," Vernon said, his voice taking on that edge I remembered from his teenage years. "You'll need to move your things to the barn. We've already cleared it out. Set up a bed, a dresser. There's a space heater for winter." I stared at him. The barn. Tom's old workshop. The place where we'd stored tools and hay and memories. Vernon the first. "Come on, Mom." He leaned back in the chair, my chair at my table. "You're always saying you don't need much. You've told me 100 times that material things don't matter, that family is what counts. Well, now you can prove it." The words hit like a physical blow. My own philosophy, my own teachings about love and sacrifice, weaponized and thrown back at me to justify stealing my home. Margot had stopped moving, entirely frozen with a dish halfway to a box. The silence stretched between us, filled with 43 years of history. "When?" I asked slowly. "Today," Margot said quietly. "Mom arrives this afternoon. Her treatment team recommended the transition happen quickly to minimize stress for her." I looked at the boxes Margot had been packing. Really looked at them. The cardboard was creased at the corners. The tape yellowed slightly. These weren't fresh boxes from this morning. These were boxes that had been packed days ago, maybe weeks. Someone had planned this long before Vernon sat me down at my own kitchen table. "I'll need time to pack," I said. "We'll help," Margot offered, but her voice was hollow. "No," I said, "I'll do it myself." The barn was exactly what you'd expect. Concrete floors, exposed beams, and the lingering smell of motor oil and old hay. They'd pushed aside Tom's workbench and set up a twin bed where my car used to park. A cheap plastic dresser sat in the corner, the kind you'd buy for a college dorm room. Margot had hung a curtain across one section, creating what she generously called privacy. "It's your own private space, really," she said, setting down a box of my clothes. "Complete independence. Independence." As if being exiled to my own barn was some kind of liberation. That afternoon, Estelle Kendrick arrived clutching Margot's arm. She was 64, a retired library clerk with careful movements and worried eyes. She looked around the house, my house, with the confusion of someone being moved against their will. "This is very kind," she said to me in the hallway, her voice uncertain. I smiled and said nothing. Through the window, I watched Vernon carry her suitcases upstairs to my bedroom, the room where Tom and I had slept for 30 years, where I'd recovered from surgery, where I'd spent countless mornings watching the sun rise over the land we'd built together. That night, I sat on the narrow bed in the barn and opened my laptop. I'd been thinking about the financial arrangement Vernon had proposed 6 months ago. He'd convinced me to let him help with expenses to take over managing the bills so I could relax and enjoy retirement. He'd set up a joint account, gotten power of attorney to handle my affairs. It had seemed reasonable at the time. He was good with money, had experience with business finances. I trusted him completely. Now I pulled up the bank statements with different eyes. The mortgage payment drawn from the joint account. Source of funds, my monthly pension deposit of $1,850. Property taxes, joint account. Source, my pension. Homeowners insurance, joint account. Source, my pension. Utilities, groceries, everything my pension, my Social Security, my money. Vernon's contributions to the account over 6 months zero. He'd been using my own money to pay for the privilege of living in my house while making it look like he was supporting me. And now he'd exiled me to the barn, using my own words about family and sacrifice. I sat there for a long time in the barn that smelled like hay and motor oil. Tom's old saddle hook still hung on the wall untouched for 10 years. Through the gaps in the wooden planks, I could see the lights on in my farmhouse. Then I opened my laptop again. If Vernon wanted to play games with what I'd built over 40 years, he was about to learn that the woman who built it was still very much in the room. Even if that room now had concrete floors and the ghost of my husband's tools hanging on the walls. The next morning, I learned the first new rule of living in my own barn: stay out of your own kitchen. I woke early out of habit the way I had for 40 years. The barn was cold, the space heater barely keeping the September chill at bay. I walked across the dew-wet grass toward the farmhouse, toward the smell of coffee I could already detect from the back door. Margot was at the counter when I stepped inside. She startled slightly, then recovered with a tight smile. "Oh, good morning. I'm so sorry, but could you maybe give us about an hour?" She gestured toward the table where Estelle sat with a pill organizer the size of a tackle box. Mom's medication schedule is really strict. The doctor emphasized maintaining consistent routines, and "There's instant coffee in the barn, Mom," Vernon said from the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in. "We picked some up yesterday. More convenient for everyone to handle their own meals." I looked at Estelle. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe concern. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it. "Of course," I said. "I understand." Vernon studied my face, looking for signs of rebellion or distress. Finding neither, he relaxed slightly. "Mom, if this arrangement is too hard for you, there are some really nice senior communities in town. Sunset Pines has a waiting list, but I can make some calls. People your age, activities, meals provided." "I'm fine," I said. I turned and walked back to the barn. Through the kitchen window, I saw Estelle lean toward Margot and say something in a low voice. Margot shook her head quickly, her hands fluttering in a dismissive gesture. Estelle didn't know. Vernon's own mother-in-law had no idea I was living in the barn. Whatever story he'd told her, it wasn't the truth. That afternoon, I drove into Greenville and parked outside a modest law office on Main Street. Faye Sinclair, my attorney and old high school friend, sat across from me in her cluttered office, 63 years of legal practice, evident in the careful way she examined every document I'd brought. We'd known each other since we were 17. She'd handled my legal affairs for 20 years. "Power of attorney," she said, tapping the paper. "He can make decisions about your property, your investments, even your medical care if you're incapacitated. You gave him broad authority, Lorraine." "Can I revoke it?" "As long as you're mentally competent, yes." She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "But he'll fight it, Lorraine. He'll claim you're not mentally competent to make this decision, that you're confused, unstable, especially if there's been any kind of family conflict. What do I need?" "Dr. Reeves, you need him to evaluate you before you revoke anything. A signed letter certifying your competency, your soundness of mind, dated, notarized if possible. It's your shield." I nodded slowly. "What about the farm itself?" Faye pulled out a fresh legal pad. "The farm is in your name alone. The power of attorney gives him authority to make financial decisions, but he can't transfer property ownership without your explicit consent on specific documents. Let's make absolutely sure it stays untouchable. I'll draft paperwork isolating the farm from any business liabilities he might have. How many ways can you be erased from your own life before you stop recognizing yourself?" I left Faye's office with a list of tasks and the first real hope I'd felt in 2 days. The farm was mine. Vernon had authority, but not ownership. Not yet. 2 nights later, I was searching through the barn for something to use as a nightstand when I found it. A rusted metal toolbox shoved behind Tom's old workbench. I pried it open with stiff fingers. Inside was Tom's journal. I'd forgotten he kept one. The leather cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed. I sat on the narrow bed and flipped through entries from 15-20 years ago, notes about crops and weather and Vernon's teenage years. The final entry was dated 3 months before Tom died. Worried about the boy he'd written in his careful script. Lorraine doesn't see it or won't. He takes without asking, borrows without returning, makes promises like they're coins he can spend and forget. If the day ever comes when our boy turns on you, remember this land is yours, not his, yours. I sat with those words for a long time, my finger tracing the faded pencil marks he'd made all those years ago. Tom had seen it. He'd known. A knock at the barn door startled me. I opened it to find Eugene Whitfield, 70, a neighboring farmer who'd known my late husband since they were boys. He held out a covered dish without a word, some kind of casserole still warm. The smell of it filled the cold barn. "Eugene," I said. He just nodded, that solemn nod I remembered from Tom's funeral, and turned back toward the darkness. No questions, no pity, just food and silence. After he left, I sat with Tom's journal open on my lap and pulled out my phone. Faye had given me a number earlier, a private investigator she'd worked with before. He answered on the second ring. "Bryce Townsend." "Mr. Townsend, my name is Lorraine Harrington. My attorney Faye Sinclair recommended you. I need you to investigate someone." "I'm listening." "My son, Vernon Harrington. He owns a furniture store, says business is good, but I need to know the truth. I need to know about his finances, his business dealings, where my money has been going." I paused. "And I need you to look into his past, his college years, public records, court files, anything you can find. Looking for something specific. I have a feeling there's something there he never told me, something that cost me more than just money. I'll need a retainer, $3,500 to start." I thought of the private savings account I'd opened 30 years ago, back when I still ran the flower shop. The account Vernon had never known about. "I'll transfer it tonight." I hung up and looked around the barn. Tom's saddle hook on the wall, his journal open on my lap. The smell of Eugene's still warm casserole filling the cold space. Vernon thought he'd buried me out here. He had no idea he'd just given me the perfect headquarters to dismantle everything he'd built on lies. The first brick in that fortress had to be medical proof that I was exactly as sharp as I'd always been. Dr. Reeves had been my family physician for 26 years. He'd seen me through Tom's death, through the kidney donation I'd made to save Vernon's life 17 years ago, through every flu and checkup since. He sat across from me in the examination room that morning with the same steady expression that had carried me through all of it. "Faye Sinclair called ahead," he said. "She mentioned you might need a competency evaluation. Want to tell me what's going on?" I told him. The barn, the kitchen exclusion, the joint account Vernon controlled. I kept my voice level and my facts precise. Dr. Reeves listened without interrupting his pen, moving across the evaluation form. "All right," he said when I finished. "Let's start with the basics. What's today's date?" The evaluation took 40 minutes. He tested my memory, my orientation, my judgment. He asked me to recall 3 words after 5 minutes, to draw a clock showing a specific time, to explain what I do in various scenarios. I answered every question correctly. When we finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What you're describing, Lorraine, being displaced from your home, having your finances controlled without your knowledge, that's textbook financial elder abuse. I'm a mandatory reporter. I'm supposed to file a report with Adult Protective Services." "Not yet," I said. "I need to handle this my way first, but I do need that letter." He studied me for a long moment. Then he pulled out his prescription pad and began writing. "You're one of the sharpest patients I have," he said. "Perfect recall, excellent judgment, completely oriented to time and place. Anyone who claims otherwise will have to go through me first." He signed the letter, pressed his medical stamp below his signature, and dated it. I watched him slide it across the desk. "If this gets worse," he said, "if you need help, you call me, day or night, understood?" "Understood." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. One piece of armor. I needed more. The next afternoon, I drove back to downtown Greenville and parked outside a building I'd passed 100 times without noticing. The sign on the second-floor window read, "Townsend Investigations," in faded gold letters. Bryce Townsend, 55, sat behind a sparse desk in an office that looked like it had been furnished from a going-out-of-business sale, a former insurance fraud investigator Faye had told me. Quiet, methodical, and absolutely relentless when he had a trail to follow. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Mrs. Harrington, Faye mentioned you'd be coming in. What can I help you with?" My son, I said. Vernon Harrington. He owns a furniture store here in town. I need to know 3 things. His business's real financial health, not what he tells people, but what the numbers actually say. Where my pension money has been going for the last 6 months. And anything you can find in public court records from his college years. Arrests, charges, convictions. Bryce's pen paused mid-note. You have a specific suspicion about those college records. I have a feeling there's something there he never told me, I said. Something that cost me more than just money. Something that might explain why he needed so much help 20 years ago. He nodded slowly. College records, you're talking late 90s, early 2000s. Court records from that era are public, but they take time to pull. Some are only available through the courthouse directly. How much time? For a preliminary report, a week, maybe 10 days. For the full picture, 2 weeks. And your fee? Retainer is $3,500. That covers the first 20 hours. After that, we can discuss next steps. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Not the joint account Vernon monitored. The other one. The account I'd opened 30 years ago when Tom was alive, back when I still ran the flower shop in town. Just a small safety net, a quiet insurance policy against disasters I couldn't predict. I'd been adding to it for decades. Small deposits, nothing Vernon would notice if he ever saw my tax returns. It had grown slowly, steadily, invisibly. I transferred the retainer amount while Bryce watched. That account, he said carefully. Your son doesn't know about it. No one knows about it, I said. Tom knew when he was alive, but I never mentioned it after he died. It seemed smarter to keep it separate. Turns out I was right. Bryce smiled slightly. You've been planning for something like this. I've been planning for 30 years, I said. I just didn't know what I was planning for until 3 days ago. He stood and extended his hand. I'll start pulling records tomorrow. Public filings, court documents, business licenses. If there's something there, I'll find it. One more thing, I said. If you find evidence of criminal activity, fraud, theft, anything prosecutable, can you document it in a way that would hold up legally? That's what I do. I drove back to the farm as the sun was setting. The barn looked smaller, somehow less like a prison, and more like what it was, a temporary headquarters while I built my case. Bryce said he'd have a preliminary report in 1 week, 7 days to learn what my son had really been hiding all these years. I drove back to the farm, to the barn, and waited. Vernon had no idea the clock was already ticking. Those 7 days stretched into 2 weeks while Bryce pulled records and I watched my son photograph every corner of the farm Tom and I had built, cataloging it like inventory. Vernon worked systematically. The old oak tree by the fence line, the one Tom had planted the year Vernon was born. The irrigation system we'd installed in '97. The barn itself from every angle, with and without the late afternoon sun. Just documenting the property for insurance purposes, he told Margot when she asked. I watched from the barn window and wondered if he even remembered that oak tree, if he knew the story behind it. I doubted it. To him, it was just an asset in a listing. Every night, Eugene knocked on the barn door with warm food. No words, never words. Just that solemn nod and the smell of whatever he'd cooked filling the cold space. I was grateful for the silence. Words would have required explanations I wasn't ready to give. I maintained perfect outward compliance. Good morning in the kitchen doorway before retreating. No complaints, no confrontations. Vernon watched me carefully those first few days, looking for cracks. Finding none, he relaxed. 2 weeks and 3 days after I'd hired him, Bryce called. Report's ready. I'm sending it to the P.O. box you gave me. Should be there by morning. I drove to the Greenville post office at dawn. The package was thick manila envelope stuffed with 52 pages. I sat in my car in this parking lot and opened it. The furniture store financials came first. Actual monthly revenue running at 30% of what Vernon had reported to suppliers. 3 major vendors preparing breach of contract lawsuits. A commercial loan with a December 15th deadline for renewal. Behind on payments, behind on inventory orders, behind on everything. Then the pension trail. 6 months of meticulous withdrawals from the joint account I'd trusted him to manage. Every dollar traced back to my deposits. $23,400 siphoned directly into his failing business to cover payroll and lease defaults. Then the court records. State of South Carolina versus Vernon Harrington. Filed June 2006. Possession with intent to distribute controlled substance, specifically oxycodone. Defendant, age 21. Resolved via plea agreement, 2 years probation community service fines. Bryce had attached a medical research summary. Prolonged opioid abuse is a documented cause of progressive liver damage. Timeline of defendant's abuse period matches hospitalization records from 2007. I closed the folder. I looked out the windshield at the parking lot at the ordinary people going about their ordinary morning errands. I remembered the morning I signed the papers to sell my flower shop. The shop I'd built from nothing, the small storefront on Lawrence Street where I'd worked 70-hour weeks and built something that was mine. Vernon had been 22, hospitalized with acute liver failure. The doctor said it was genetic, that his liver was simply failing for reasons they couldn't fully explain. They said he needed extensive treatment, possibly a transplant down the line, certainly years of expensive care. I'd sold the shop within a month, paid for everything, the treatments, the specialists, the medications. I'd given him my kidney 5 years later when the damage progressed when they said a family donor was his only hope. He'd destroyed his own liver selling drugs to college students, and he'd let me sacrifice everything to fix it. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours. Then I drove back to the farm and called Wade Kendrick. Wade was Margot's older brother. 40 owned a construction materials supply business in Anderson. We'd met a handful of times at family gatherings. He had the practical, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd built a business from the ground up and knew exactly what financial trouble smelled like. "Wade, it's Lorraine, Margot's mother-in-law. We need to talk. Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "It's not. I need to tell you something about Vernon's business and about the living arrangement at the farm." I laid it out. The insolvency, the siphoned funds, the criminal record, the barn. "Jesus, Lorraine," he said when I finished. "Margot told us you offered to move to the barn, that you thought it would be fun like camping. She said you were excited about it." "I live in a barn because my son needed my bedroom for his mother-in-law so he could justify controlling my finances while his business collapsed. There's nothing fun about it." Silence on the line. "I had no idea," Wade said finally. "None of us did. If I'd known." "There's something else," I said. "Something I need to ask you. Has Vernon ever contacted you about property appraisals, farmland valuations?" Another pause. "He called me back in June, maybe July, asked if I knew anyone who could appraise farmland, said he was exploring options. I thought he meant buying more land expanding. I gave him a couple names. 2 or 3 months. He'd been pricing my land 2 or 3 months before his mother-in-law ever felt a spike in her blood pressure." "Wade, when did Margot tell you about her mother's diagnosis?" "Early September, right before they moved her in." After I hung up with Wade, I sat very still in the barn. The plan had been in motion for months. The appraisal call in June or July. The barn furniture purchase 3 weeks before September. The medication excuse perfectly timed. I had been the last domino, falling right on schedule exactly as Vernon had planned. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd given me time to build something of my own. I didn't have to wait long for his next move. 3 days after Wade confirmed the timeline, Vernon showed up at the barn just after dawn. He didn't knock. He walked straight through the door I'd left unlocked for deliveries and stood at the foot of my cot, hands in his pockets like he owned the air I breathed. "We need to talk about your capacity," he said. I sat up slowly, pulling the quilt around my shoulders. The barn was cold in the mornings now. October had brought frost that silvered the grass outside and made the metal walls radiate chill. "My capacity for what?" "Making decisions." He pulled out his phone, swiped a few times, then turned the screen toward me. "I've been documenting some concerning behavior, paranoia, accusations, hiring strangers to investigate your own family." I looked at the screen, screenshots of text messages I'd never sent, emails I'd never written, all time-stamped, all perfectly plausible if you didn't know they were fabricated. "Those aren't real," I said. "A court won't know that." He pocketed the phone, his expression flat and businesslike. "Dr. Reeves does competency evaluations. Very thorough, very objective. I've already reached out to his office to schedule your assessment." There it was. The threat he'd been building towards since September. If I challenged him, he'd have me declared incompetent. No capacity to manage my own affairs, no standing to contest anything. I'd become a legal ghost in my own life. I stood up, my bare feet cold against the plywood floor, walked to the small table I'd set up near the window, picked up the manila folder I'd been keeping there for exactly this conversation. "Dr. Marcus Reeves," I said, my voice steady, "neuropsychologist, office on Wade Hampton Boulevard." Vernon's expression didn't change, but his shoulders tensed, just slightly. "I had my evaluation 2 weeks ago," I continued. "Full cognitive assessment, memory testing, executive function, judgment capacity, 4 hours of testing. He certified me fully competent, no cognitive decline, no impairment, no concerns whatsoever." I handed him the folder. He didn't open it, just stared at the label on the front. Cognitive evaluation. Lorraine Harrington, October 12, 2023. The original is with Faye, I said, along with a notarized statement explaining why I sought the evaluation. Your name came up quite a bit in that statement. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he dropped the folder on the table and walked out without another word. The barn door banged shut behind him. I waited until his truck was gone before I let myself sit down. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the adrenaline of watching his plan collapse in real time, of seeing the calculation in his eyes when he realized I'd outmaneuvered him. Faye had suggested the evaluation after our first meeting. Get ahead of it, she'd said. Whatever he's planning, competency is always the first attack against older clients. She'd been right. Dr. Reeves had been professional, thorough, and exactly what I needed. The certification was ironclad. I made coffee on the hot plate and checked my phone while the water heated. An email from Bryce sent 20 minutes earlier. Subject line, Foundation work urgent. I opened it. The email had 2 attachments. The first was a photograph of a receipt from Greenville Building Supply. The second was a close-up of the date stamp. I zoomed in on the first image. Itemized purchase twin bed frame mattress, bedside table lamp area rug. Total $847.63. Payment method, Vernon Harrington personal credit card. Purchase date September 8, 2023. I stared at the date. Then I opened my calendar and scrolled back through September, tracing the timeline I'd lived through without seeing the pattern. September 29th was the day Estelle called to tell me what Vernon and Margot had told her to say. Kidney disease stage 4, declining rapidly. She needed to move in immediately. Vernon was sacrificing his home office to make room for her, doing everything a devoted son should do. But the furniture had been purchased 3 weeks earlier. I read Bryce's email. Pulled Vernon's credit card records through the asset search your attorney authorized. This transaction stood out. He bought bedroom furniture for the barn conversion on September 8th. Estelle's diagnosis wasn't announced to the family until September 29th. I cross-referenced medical records. Her first nephrology appointment was September 27th. He bought the furniture before anyone knew she was sick, or before anyone was supposed to know. I set the phone down, picked it up again, read the email 3 more times each pass, making the timeline sharper. Vernon had purchased furniture to convert my bedroom into Estelle's care space 3 weeks before Estelle's diagnosis was announced. 3 weeks before the nephrology appointment that supposedly confirmed her condition. 3 weeks before he had any legitimate reason to prepare a room for his mother-in-law. Which meant one of 2 things: either he'd somehow known about her illness before she did, or he'd known I'd be moving out regardless of whether Estelle needed the room. The barn wasn't a temporary solution to an unexpected crisis. It was the destination he'd planned for me all along. The furniture receipt was proof. I photographed every page of the receipt. Then I forwarded everything to Faye with a single line: he bought the bed before Mom got sick. This wasn't a desperate son helping family. This was a calculated business decision with a paper trail. Faye called back within the hour. Her voice was steady, almost calm. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. We have work to do. I hung up and stared at the barn ceiling, the September 8th receipt still glowing on my phone screen. Vernon had bought furniture 3 weeks before anyone was supposed to know Estelle was sick. The timeline wasn't just suspicious anymore, it was documented. The next morning, I walked up to the main house to use the bathroom before driving into town. Margot's phone lit up on the living room table while she was outside in the garden, and I learned exactly how long Vernon had given me to live. The phone sat face up on the coffee table, unlocked. A notification had just come in, some spam about a credit card offer, but it wasn't the new message that caught my eye. It was the text thread visible beneath it. Contact name Jake. The preview showed a message from 4 months ago. July 2023. I leaned closer, not touching the phone, just reading. Once Mom signs the guardianship paperwork, we can list the farm. Probably 6 months from now. Jake, this thing is worth $300,000 easy. I stood there for 10 seconds. Maybe 15. The garden door was still open. I could hear Margot humming something while she worked the tomato beds. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. I walked back to the barn, got in my car, and drove straight to Faye's office. I called her from the parking lot. I need to see you today, I said. I know what he's planning, all of it. She moved her 9 o'clock appointment. Inside her office, I told her everything. The text message, the contact name Jake, the timeline guardianship paperwork, 6 months farm sale, $300,000. He wrote it down, I said. He actually wrote it down in a text message. Faye leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Guardianship. That's the endgame. Once he has that, you have no legal standing. He can sell the farm, liquidate everything, and you can't stop him. The message was from July, I said. 4 months ago. 6 months from then would be January, Faye finished. He's been working a timeline this entire time. 6 months. That's how long I had been living on a schedule I didn't know existed. Before I show you what that deadline really meant, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think Vernon planned this from the start, or B, if you think he improvised along the way, add one reason in 5 to 10 words. A quick note. The next part includes some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact and convey the core message. Faye pulled a folder from her desk. We revoke the power of attorney today, right now. I've already drafted the paperwork, it just needs your signature and a notary seal. She slid the document across the desk. 3 pages clean legal language, 1 signature line at the bottom of the 3rd page. Once this is filed, Vernon loses access to everything, she continued. Bank accounts, property decisions, financial transactions, all of it. What about the guardianship? I asked. He can't file for guardianship if you're legally competent and you've revoked his authority. Dr. Reeves's certification kills that option, but we need to move fast. I picked up the pen. There's something else, Faye said. I sent formal notice to Vernon's commercial bank yesterday, the one holding his business loan. I informed them that Harrington Farm is held under your sole ownership and was never authorized as collateral for any loan or extension. I looked up. What does that mean? It means their risk management department is auditing his entire loan file right now, looking for asset misrepresentation, unauthorized collateral claims, anything that violates the loan agreement. How long do we have? Faye tapped a calendar on her desk. His loan extension application has a decision deadline December 15th. If the bank denies the extension because of fraudulent collateral claims, the entire loan principal comes due immediately. No payment plan, no grace period, everything accelerates. December 15th. I looked at the calendar. November 17th today, 28 days. That's enough time, Faye said quietly. But we move this week. Sign the revocation. I'll get it notarized and filed today. The bank will receive confirmation that you've terminated his authority. That adds weight to the audit. I signed the revocation that afternoon. Faye notarized it herself, pressing her seal into the paper with a metallic click that sounded louder than it should have. Walking out of her office, I felt the weight of 6 months lift from my shoulders, not completely, not yet, but enough to breathe. The next morning, Faye called. The bank received our documentation. They've escalated the audit to their fraud review team. Vernon's loan officer left him a voicemail requesting an in-person meeting to clarify some discrepancies in his application. When, I asked, they didn't say. But the deadline stands December 15th. If he can't prove the farm was legitimately available as collateral, and he can't because it wasn't, the extension gets denied. And if the extension gets denied, the whole thing collapses. I sat down on the edge of my cot in the barn. 28 days. 4 weeks. That's how long Vernon had to either come clean with the bank or watch his entire business implode. What happens if he tries to sell the farm before then? I asked. He can't, Faye said. The POA is revoked. He has no authority to execute a sale, and even if he tried, title companies run ownership verification. Your name is on the deed, not his. Any buyer's attorney would catch it immediately. I hung up and looked at the calendar I'd hung on the barn wall. December 15th, circled in red pen. 28 days. That's how long Vernon had to either come clean with the bank or watch everything collapse. I drove back to the farm knowing exactly when the clock would run out. I laid the evidence folder on the kitchen table the morning Vernon left for his supplier meeting, and I asked Margot to sit down. She looked at the folder, then at me. What is this? Everything you need to know, I said. I spread the documents across the table. Furniture store insolvency notices from the county clerk's office. Bank statements showing $23,400 withdrawn from my pension account over 6 months. Court records from Vernon's age 21 drug arrest in Charleston. And the receipt from Greenville Building Supply dated September 8th. Margot picked up the bank statements first. Her hands were shaking. This can't be right. He said business was good. He said you offered the barn. Read the dates, I said. She read. Her face went pale. The business has been insolvent for 2 years, I continued. He's been using my pension to cover supplier invoices and payroll. Faye traced every withdrawal, every transfer, every wire. Margot set down the bank statements and picked up the arrest record. She stared at it for a long time. He told me this was sealed. He told me it was expunged. It was sealed, I said. Faye got a court order to unseal it for the asset investigation. She put the arrest record down and picked up the receipt. The one from Greenville Building Supply. Her eyes scanned the itemized list bed frame, mattress, bedside table, lamp area, rug. Then she saw the date, September 8th, 2023. She looked at me. When did Mom get diagnosed? September 29th, I said. 3 weeks later. She looked at the receipt for a long time. Then she looked at me. He bought the bed before Mom got sick, she said. Not a question. Yes. You're trying to destroy my marriage, she whispered. I'm trying to save your life, I said. She stood up, walked to the window, and pulled out her phone. I heard her dial, heard Wade answer, heard her voice shake as she said, I need you to come get us, today. I left her there and went to sit on the porch. The November air was cold, but I needed it. I needed to feel something other than the weight of what I'd just done. 2 hours later, Estelle emerged from the living room. She moved slowly, one hand on the wall for balance, but her eyes were clear. She'd heard everything. She stood in the doorway and looked at Margot, who was still at the kitchen table, staring at the receipt. I have high blood pressure, Estelle said, her voice steady. I take a pill every morning. I am not a reason to put someone's mother in a barn. Margot looked up, tears streaming down her face. Estelle turned to me. I am so sorry, I did not know. I nodded, I couldn't speak. Estelle turned back to Margot. Call your brother, we're leaving today. There was a knock at the door. Eugene stood on the threshold holding an empty food container he'd brought by days earlier. He'd come to return it. His eyes took in the scene, the documents on the table, Margot's tear-streaked face, Estelle standing like a judge pronouncing sentence. He met my eyes, nodded once, then he turned and walked back to his house without a word. Wade's truck pulled into the driveway an hour later. He helped Estelle into the passenger seat, his face hard and expressionless. Margot loaded 2 bags into the back. That's when Vernon's car turned the corner at the end of the road. He pulled into the driveway and got out slowly, his eyes scanning the scene. Wade's truck, Estelle in the passenger seat, Margot holding a suitcase. What's going on, he asked. Margot held up the receipt. You bought that bed 3 weeks before Mom got sick. Vernon looked at me, then back at Margot. Mom's having a mental breakdown. She's been... Dr. Reeves signed my competency evaluation 3 weeks ago, I said. Full cognitive assessment. No impairment, no decline. The original is with my attorney. He turned to Estelle. Mom, please. You know I did this for you. I needed nothing that required a barn, Estelle said. Vernon's voice rose. When my business goes under, the bank is coming after this farm. You'll lose everything. Faye sent the bank a letter clarifying this farm was never your collateral, I said. They're auditing your loan application right now, looking for asset fraud, unauthorized collateral claims, every lie you told them. He stared at me. The power of attorney, revoked, I said, filed and notarized. You have no authority over my accounts, my property, or my decisions. Every attack vector he possessed had been blocked weeks in advance. He was hollowed out. He dropped to his knees in front of Estelle. Please, I need you to stay. Just one more time. Estelle looked down at him. I am not a safety net for a man who put his mother in a barn. Vernon turned to me. His face was wet. Please, I'm your son. I looked at him for a long time. At the face I'd held when he was born. The boy I'd raised. The man who'd sat across from me in this kitchen and told me Estelle needed my bedroom. Your son died, I said quietly, the day he decided his mother was disposable. Eugene stepped forward from where he'd been standing at the edge of the driveway. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, shoulders square, hands loose at his sides. A witness. A wall. Vernon stood up slowly, looked at all of us. Then he walked into the house. He left that night with 2 bags and his laptop. I watched from the porch, the same porch where Tom and I had sat every evening for 30 years. I poured myself a glass of wine and watched until his headlights disappeared into the dark. The calls started coming in early December, first from Faye, then Wade, each one marking another piece of Vernon's empire falling away. I didn't follow him when he left. I didn't check on him. I sat on that porch until the wine was gone and the stars came out, and then I went to sleep in the barn one last time. Faye called on December 15th. Her voice was businesslike, almost clinical. The bank denied the extension this morning. They found he'd listed your farm as corporate collateral on 3 separate loan applications over the past 18 months. That's federal bank fraud, Lorraine. I sat down at the small table in the barn. What happens now? The entire loan principal accelerates immediately. He owes the full amount within 30 days, or the bank seizes whatever assets he actually owns, which according to the audit is almost nothing. The furniture inventory was already pledged to suppliers. The equipment is leased. The building lease is past due. How much does he owe? $147,000. I closed my eyes. The suppliers are already filing lawsuits, Faye continued. 3 so far. The employees received termination notices yesterday. The store is entering forced liquidation. Everything goes to auction next month. And Vernon? I don't know where he is, Faye said. Margot filed divorce papers yesterday. She's staying with Wade and Estelle until she finds her own place. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired in the way you feel tired after a long illness. Not the sickness itself, but the recovery. The part where you realize how much it took out of you without you noticing. Wade called 3 days later. His voice was gentler than Faye's, but just as direct. Mom wanted me to tell you Estelle's doing much better. Turns out she was on too many medications. They were interacting with each other, causing confusion. Her new doctor simplified everything, took her off 4 prescriptions. How is she now? Her blood pressure is perfectly controlled. 1 pill once a day, no dementia, no kidney disease, just high blood pressure, exactly like she always said. I sat with that information for a long time after we hung up. Estelle had been the justification for everything. The bedroom, the barn, the sudden urgency, and she'd been telling the truth the whole time. 2 weeks before Christmas, I walked into the master bedroom and started removing every piece of medical equipment Vernon had installed. The hospital bed went first. I called a medical supply company and they picked it up the same day. The oxygen concentrator, the bedside commode, the IV stand he'd bought but never used, all of it went into boxes and out the door. I stripped the bed down to the mattress and washed the linens in hot water with lavender detergent. Hung them outside in the December cold until they smelled like winter air and nothing else. I put Tom's photograph back on the nightstand. The one of us at the county fair in 1992, standing in front of the Ferris wheel, his arm around my shoulders. I'd taken it down when Vernon moved Estelle in. I put it back. Then I opened the drawer where I'd hidden Tom's journal and read the entry I'd been carrying in my mind for 3 months. If the day ever comes when our boy turns on you, remember this land is yours, not his, yours. I placed the journal in the top drawer of the nightstand. Not hidden anymore, just close. The room looked exactly as it had before Vernon announced that September morning, but I was different. The woman who had slept here 3 months ago would never come back. There was a knock at the front door just as the sun was setting. I opened it to find Eugene standing on the porch holding a small potted plant. Not a casserole, not a container of soup, a winter bloom, white petals just beginning to open. He handed it to me without a word. Just that same solemn nod he'd given me a dozen times over the past 3 months. Then he turned and walked back across the field toward his house, his shoulders square against the winter dark. I set the plant on the kitchen windowsill and stood there looking at it for a long time. Eugene had brought me food every week since September. Sustenance. Survival. This was the first time he'd brought me something that existed just to be beautiful. That night I made up the bed with the clean linens and slept in my own room for the first time in 3 months. The mattress felt different than I remembered, firmer somehow. Or maybe I was just noticing things I'd stopped paying attention to years ago. I left the window open just a crack. The December air was sharp and cold, but it smelled like hay and wood smoke and something else, something sweeter, like the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. I thought about Vernon, about where he might be sleeping tonight, about whether he understood what he'd lost or whether he was still calculating how to win it back. I thought about Margot sleeping in Wade's guest room, trying to rebuild a life from the pieces of a marriage that had been built on lies. I thought about Estelle taking 1 pill every morning, her blood pressure perfectly controlled, wondering how she'd become the excuse for someone else's cruelty. And I thought about Tom, about the journal entry he'd written years before he died, as if he'd known this day was coming, and wanted to leave me something to hold on to when it arrived. The window curtain moved in the cold breeze. Somewhere outside an owl called. The sound carried across the dark fields clear and sharp. I pulled the quilt up to my chin and closed my eyes. Spring was still 2 months away. By late February, the horse barn no longer smelled like motor oil and exile. It smelled like fresh-cut timber and rich potting soil waiting for spring. Spring came slowly that year. February was all cold mornings and gray skies, but the light changed. It came earlier each day, stayed longer each evening. I could feel the shift in my bones. I spent 3 weeks transforming the barn. The cot went first, hauled away by the same charity truck that had picked up Estelle's medical equipment. The hot plate, the space heater, the plastic bins that had held my clothes, all of it went. I hired a contractor to install 2 real windows on the south wall, replacing the cracked planks Vernon had patched with duct tape years ago. Glass windows, double-paned. They let in light that made the whole space feel twice as large. I built a sturdy workbench where the cot had sat using lumber from the hardware store in town. Sanded it smooth. sealed it with polyurethane that smelled like possibility. I installed wooden racks along the east wall for drying flowers, stacked bags of potting soil in the corner, organized seed packets in a wooden box Tom had built decades ago for storing horsetack lavender black-eyed Susan's wildflower mix Cosmos zinnias. I kept Tom's saddle hook on the wall, the one he'd mounted when we first bought this place back when the barn still held horses instead of humiliation. I kept it not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of what I'd survived. And I hung a small hand-painted sign on the outer door letters careful and deliberate, "Weekend Flower Workshop, open to all." This space that Vernon designed to erase me would become the place I'd teach others to grow things from nothing. I was organizing seed packets by bloom season when my phone buzzed on the workbench. Unknown number, but I knew. "Mom, please call me. I need help. I'm sorry for everything. I love you." I read it once. Then I sat down on the stool I'd placed near the workbench and read it again. I thought about the flower shop I'd sold to cover his first failed business, the years of checks I'd written when suppliers threatened to sue, the retirement account Tom and I had built together, drained by 6 months of unauthorized withdrawals. I thought about September, the barn, the cot, the eviction from my own bedroom delivered like a favor. I thought about the furniture receipt dated 3 weeks before anyone was supposed to know Estelle was sick. Some people might call me heartless. Those people have never been betrayed by someone they'd die to protect. I deleted the message without responding, set the phone face down on the workbench, went back to sorting seeds. Lavender, black-eyed Susans, wildflower mix for the beginners. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel anything at all when I thought about Vernon now. Just a kind of distant clarity, like looking at a storm from far away and knowing you're safe inside. I didn't need much, but what I did need I deserved to keep, and I'd never need him again. The winter sun came through the new windows and cut across the workbench in long golden lines. Outside, the fields were still brown and dormant, but I could see the beginning of green at the base of the grass. Spring was 8 weeks away, maybe less. I spread out my workshop plan on the bench. I'd start small Saturday mornings late April through June, teach basic container gardening, how to start seeds indoors, how to transplant seedlings without shocking them, how to deadhead blooms to encourage new growth. I imagined neighbors I'd never met standing at this workbench soil under their fingernails learning to grow beauty from dirt and determination. I imagined strangers coming to this barn and leaving with something they'd made with their own hands. The barn that Vernon had turned into my prison would become a place where people learned to create things that didn't need to justify their existence. Flowers that bloomed because that's what flowers do. Not for profit, not for strategy, just because they could. Tom once told me that the best thing about flowers is they don't need you to explain yourself to them. You just show up, give them what they need, and they grow. No questions, no accusations, no demands for justification. I'm done explaining myself. To Vernon. To anyone who thinks a mother owes her son endless chances to destroy her. This is my land. These are my hands. This is the life I'm building from the ruins of the one I thought I had. I picked up the wildflower seed packet and turned it over in my hands. The instructions were simple: scatter seeds in prepared soil water, gently wait for sun. No complicated strategy, no perfect conditions required, just basic care and time. I thought about Tom's journal still in the top drawer of my nightstand, the entry I'd read 100 times. This land is yours, not his, yours. He'd known. Somehow, years before it happened, he'd known I'd need that reminder, that I'd need to hear his voice telling me I had the right to stay. I looked around the transformed barn. New windows letting in light that had been blocked for years. Clean workbench waiting for spring projects. Seed packets organized and ready. Tom's saddle hook still mounted on the wall, holding nothing now except memory and proof. This space had been designed to break me, to isolate me, to make me small enough that I'd disappear without anyone noticing. Instead, it became the place where I remembered how to grow things. The phone buzzed again on the workbench. I didn't look at it. I knew who it was. I knew what he wanted. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had nothing left to give him. I put the seed packets back in their box and closed the lid. Tomorrow I'd finish the racks. Next week I'd print flyers for the workshop and post them at the library and the hardware store. Come spring, this barn is going to be full of the most beautiful things I've ever grown. And to you listening to my story, remember this: your home, your land, your peace are worth protecting. Looking back, I see where I went wrong. I gave too much too many times without setting boundaries. I enabled Vernon's failures by always catching him when he fell. I thought unconditional love meant unconditional rescue, but real love sometimes means letting someone face the consequences of their choices. Don't make my mistake. Don't sacrifice yourself until there's nothing left to give. The lesson I learned is this: you can love your children without funding their destruction of you. Revenge stories with Mom at the center aren't about cruelty, they're about reclaiming dignity. These family revenge stories remind us that maternal love doesn't mean maternal erasure. I believe God put me through this to teach me that boundaries aren't betrayal. The barn that was meant to break me became the place where I remembered my worth. That wasn't coincidence. That was grace. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting someone you love? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you appreciate these family revenge stories, subscribe to Silent Revenge with Phoenix for more revenge stories with Mom who found their strength when it mattered most. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. Please remember, some details in this story have been adapted for storytelling and reflection. What matters is the message. God bless you.